Have you ever wondered what truly lies behind the glittering facade of Hollywood's golden era? Picture this: glamorous movie premieres, flashbulbs sparkling like miniature fireworks, and a beautiful young actress stepping onto the red carpet in a stunning gown that leaves the crowd spellbound. In the 1940s and 1950s, few names captured that level of mystique quite like Jane Russell, a figure who lit up movie screens with her distinct combination of allure, talent, and undeniable screen presence. Yet beneath the dazzle of celebrity stardom was a more complicated story, one of triumphs and defeats, friendships and heartbreak, and ultimately a life that would end quietly in her home, far from the fanfare she once knew. This is the story of Jane Russell, reimagined and retold with a spark of modern energy, to bring you an experience akin to watching a thoroughly captivating entertainment broadcast that sweeps you away into another world. So get comfortable, grab some popcorn, and prepare to dive deeper into a life shaped by ambition, faith, music, and more than a few twists that reveal the surprising complexities of a Hollywood star. In the early part of the 20th century, June 21st, 1921 to be precise, Jane Russell was born in the small town of Bemidji, Minnesota. Her father, Roy William Russell, had been a first lieutenant in the U.S. Army, and her mother, Geraldine, was an actress with a strong background in performance. If you can imagine a Midwestern, turn-of-the-century environment with wide open spaces, small-town gossip, and endless farmland, you might conjure an image of where Jane spent her earliest days. But it wasn't long before her parents' aspirations and life circumstances paved the way for a new environment. The Russell family eventually found themselves moving, seeking opportunity and stability. Jane's mother, who had a flair for drama, fostered in her daughter a similar passion for performing. Geraldine herself had been immortalized in a portrait painted by Mary Britton Thompson, an American artist recognized for her talent by none other than President Woodrow Wilson. That early brush with recognition in high society might have influenced Jane in subtle ways, letting her see that a life in the arts could open doors beyond the ordinary. Jane's early interest in music and drama wasn't a product of random teenage whim. It was nurtured from a very young age. Geraldine arranged piano lessons, introduced her daughter to stage performance, and encouraged all that theatrical spark. While many kids might have balked at parental nudging, Jane embraced it. She took to the piano with discipline, and soon she was gracing local high school stages, developing her confidence as a performer. She attended Van Nuys High School, located in the San Fernando Valley area of Los Angeles, an environment already pulsing with the influence of Hollywood, even if that big city glamour was still a short drive over the hills. Young Jane's initial dreams, interestingly enough, didn't center solely on acting. She flirted with the idea of becoming a fashion designer, an aspiration that perhaps might have made sense considering her striking sense of style that would later become one of her calling cards. But life has a way of steering us in directions we never quite expect. When her father passed away, financial responsibilities compelled her to seek work in more immediate, practical fields. Picture an 18-year-old Jane Russell, newly graduated, grieving her father's loss and suddenly thrust into adulthood. She found work as a receptionist at a doctor's office, a job that placed her in the realm of the everyday, answering phones, greeting patients, dealing with medical paperwork. Yet she still clung to her performance ambitions, and every now and then, when an opportunity arose, she would model for local photographers, picking up some extra cash and maintaining that small but significant link to the world of cameras and lights. Geraldine, who was unwavering in her conviction that Jane was destined for the stage or screen, insisted on more formal training. So Jane attended Max Reinhardt's theatrical workshop, an influential environment that honed the skills of many an aspiring actor, and also studied under the guidance of acting coach Maria Uspenskaya. These experiences likely helped Jane refine her craft, molding her raw, natural charisma into a more polished style that would prove invaluable when her big break arrived. In Hollywood, big breaks often come in the form of chance meetings or hidden connections. For Jane Russell, that moment materialized through a 7-year contract with Howard Hughes, the prodigious and notoriously eccentric film producer, entrepreneur, and aviation enthusiast. If you imagine stepping off an anonymous sidewalk and walking into a studio lot only to find yourself signing a multi-year deal with one of Tinseltown's most infamous moguls, you get a sense of how transformative and intimidating this moment must have felt. Hughes was already known for his big visions, bigger budgets, and an eye for female beauty. He also had a knack for stirring controversy. That is exactly what happened with Jane's debut film, The Outlaw, which began production in 1941 but was not fully released until 1943 due to battles with the censorship board. The Production Code Administration at the time was fiercely vigilant about content deemed inappropriate, and The Outlaw was a lightning rod because of the way it flaunted the leading lady's physical appeal. The public naturally became curious, and their intrigue translated into box office success once the film got its official release in 1946. For Jane, it was a baptism of fire, an introduction to the harsh realities of Hollywood politics, and a showcase that accentuated her physical allure more than her budding acting ability. Despite her obvious star power, Jane soon realized that her contract with Howard Hughes came with a caveat. Her true gifts weren't always the main focus. Many of the films she made under Hughes's guidance zeroed in on her figure, leaving critics to lament the lack of deeper, more nuanced roles that might have displayed her dramatic range. Her next major film, Young Widow, released in 1946, performed poorly at the box office, and for a while, it seemed that Jane might be at risk of becoming a one-hit wonder, overshadowed by her physical attributes. However, her resilience paid off. She stuck with the industry and tried her hand at various roles. Some of these films didn't meet with commercial success, but they provided valuable learning experiences and kept her in the Hollywood conversation. Part of her unwavering presence in the public eye stemmed from the carefully orchestrated publicity that accompanied her every move, a necessity in an era when studios constructed entire mythologies around their contract stars. In 1948, she collaborated with Paramount Pictures to star in The Paleface, a Western comedy co-starring Bob Hope. The project was a gamble. Western comedies could be a hit or miss, but The Paleface ended up raking in $4.5 million, making it Paramount's biggest financial success of that year. That film's popularity cemented Jane Russell as more than just a one-dimensional starlet. She had a comedic flair and a willingness to blend her beauty with wit, making her a more versatile leading lady than many had initially presumed. Paramount cashed in on that success, signing her on again for a sequel, Son of Paleface, which repeated the formula to near equal box office results. Jane was on a roll. The carefully curated persona of the sultry but approachable actress dovetailed nicely with the comedic elements that allowed her to display charm and comedic timing. Audiences loved it, and producers saw dollar signs. Still, if there is one film that remains etched in the collective memory of classic Hollywood fans, it would be Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, the 1953 musical comedy in which Jane co-starred with the iconic Marilyn Monroe. The cinematic chemistry between Russell and Monroe was nothing short of electric, propelling the film to over $5 million in earnings, a strong box office showing for its time. Off camera, Jane and Marilyn formed a genuine bond. They teased each other with affectionate nicknames like Baby Doll or Blondie, revealing a side of their personalities that the public rarely glimpsed. Yet even as the production soared and fans flocked to theaters to watch their favorite bombshells, Hollywood's glaring double standards cast a shadow over both women's careers. Jane was already nearing her early 30s by the mid-1950s, and in those days, that often spelled diminishing roles for actresses. The industry was notoriously unkind to women beyond a certain age, as Jane would candidly note in a 1999 interview. Once an actress was over 30, it became increasingly difficult to land leading parts. This reality, combined with the shifting sands of public taste and the arrival of younger starlets, introduced cracks into the foundation of her film career. Interestingly, Jane didn't begin her career with an exclusive focus on acting. Early on, she had a fierce ambition to sing. In 1947, around the time The Outlaw was embroiled in controversy, she took a chance on a budding musical path by recording 2 songs with the Kay Kaiser Orchestra. She even graced an album cover for Columbia Records. Yet the Hollywood demands on her time, coupled with the overshadowing presence of the image-driven marketing machine, meant that her singing aspirations had to be placed on the back burner. Years later, when the film offers began drying up or simply failing to excite her, she turned again to music. Collaborations like Kisses and Tears with Frank Sinatra and the Modernaires in 1950 showcased her sultry vocal style. She wasn't just a pretty face, she had a real ability to interpret a melody, and she found this creative endeavor refreshing after so many roles that focused heavily on her figure. The real highlight of her musical side, however, emerged in 1954 when she formed a gospel quartet with 3 members of the Hollywood Christian group. Their track "Do Lord" became an unexpected success story, selling over 2 million copies and breaking onto the Billboard charts at number 27. No small feat for a gospel number. Faith, as it turned out, was a cornerstone of Jane's life, and her musical venture was as much a reflection of her deeply held beliefs as it was an entertainment pursuit. When one member left, the group brought in another Hollywood star, Rhonda Fleming, maintaining the unique blend of high-profile glamour and spiritual devotion. In 1959, Jane signed with MGM Records for a solo album, a project that allowed her to explore the full spectrum of her musical tastes. She later reminisced in an interview that this album was finally her chance to create a record on her own terms. Around that same period, she embarked on tour, performing in the musical Belzar, ringing at the Westchester Townhouse in Yonkers. Picture her on stage, the spotlight illuminating her face, the audience enthralled not by her pinup status, but by the strength of her voice and her genuine passion. It might have been one of the more artistically fulfilling phases of her life, a chance to show the world, and perhaps herself, that she was more than the screen siren Howard Hughes had packaged for mass consumption. When the 1960s arrived, and with it, the changing tides of Hollywood, Jane Russell's film career began winding down. Audiences were gravitating toward different kinds of stories and new types of leading women. She had small appearances on various television shows, including Colgate Theater, Death Valley Days, and the Red Skelton Hour, presumably trying to keep her name alive in the shifting entertainment landscape. Her final few film roles, like the 1964 release Fate is the Hunter, might not be remembered as classics, but they served as graceful encores for a performer who was always keen to try something new. By the end of that decade, she had participated in only 4 films, a stark contrast to her prolific period in the 1940s and early 1950s. In 1970, she made her last motion picture, darker than amber, capping off a cinematic journey that had begun with so much flair and promise, yet was often hampered by the industry's narrow fixation on her physical attributes. In 1985, she published an autobiography, Jane Russell, My Path and My Detours, which offered a candid glimpse into her life and times. The memoir delved into her professional ties with Howard Hughes, with whom she had an undeniably complex relationship. She provided reflections on her personal life as well, notably her long-standing romance with her high school sweetheart, Bob Waterfield, who had been a professional American football player with the Los Angeles Rams before transitioning into coaching and other roles. Through every detail and anecdote, she underscored her faith, a constant guide that had helped her navigate the swirling storms of Hollywood and personal tribulations. Famously, during the filming of Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, Jane tried to introduce Marilyn Monroe to Christianity, while Monroe made equally earnest attempts to share Sigmund Freud's teachings with Jane. Though she couldn't have children biologically, reportedly due to complications from a botched abortion in her teenage years, she adopted 3 children with Bob Waterfield. This personal experience, combined with her compassion for orphans worldwide, drove her to found the World Adoption International Agency in 1955, recognized as the first of its kind in the United States. Imagine how forward-thinking this initiative was in an era when international adoption processes were barely formalized. Jane's organization facilitated thousands of adoptions, allowing American families to open their hearts and homes to children from various countries. Her advocacy showcased a side of her personality that rarely made tabloid headlines. Imagine how forward-thinking this initiative was in an era when international adoption processes were barely formalized. Jane's organization facilitated thousands of adoptions, allowing American families to open their hearts and homes to children from various countries. Her advocacy showcased a side of her personality that rarely made tabloid headlines. She was in front of cameras for most of her adult life, but behind the scenes, she passionately worked to unite families across oceans. To those who primarily knew her as a Hollywood siren, learning of her philanthropic endeavors might come as a surprise, yet it speaks volumes about the heart beneath the glamour. In her personal life, however, troubles brewed, particularly in the realm of alcohol. Jane had wrestled with alcoholism for much of her adult life, a fact she openly acknowledged later on. Her struggle escalated to a point where she ended up in rehab at age 79, a testament to how addiction can persist even in one's later years. At one point, she served 4 days in jail for driving under the influence, a humiliating and sobering event that brought into sharp focus how even those with extraordinary achievements are not exempt from human frailties. For the public, these revelations might have tarnished the pristine image they once held of the starlet. But for Jane, it was a step toward honesty, admitting her vulnerabilities in a town that often punishes any sign of imperfection. Fast forward to February 28, 2011. At the age of 89, Jane Russell was discovered lifeless in her home, having succumbed to respiratory illness. She was no longer the fresh-faced ingenue who had once been caught in the swirling controversies of censorship boards, nor the comedic star of Western parodies, nor the toned and glamorized figure in stylized pin-up shoots. Instead, she had aged gracefully into a grandmotherly figure still deeply involved in her local community. Etta Waterfield, her daughter-in-law, noted that Jane remained active and socially engaged right up until a few weeks before her passing, a testament to her enduring spirit. Her final days were quiet, a stark contrast to the early chapters of her life, where her name was continually splashed across marquees and magazine covers. Yet, the quietness shouldn't be misconstrued as a tragedy. After a long life lived in the spotlight, perhaps finding peace in her later years was the reward for the turbulence she endured. And while Jane Russell's official legacy in Hollywood may be defined in large part by the exploitation of her physical appeal, many critics and fans have come to reevaluate her work over time, recognizing moments in which her acting shone through, glimpses of what might have been had she been offered more substantially crafted scripts. Her comedic flair in certain films remains delightful, and those who explore her musical recordings can sense the earnestness and genuine skill that made her more than a curvaceous on-screen beauty. The nostalgic legacy Jane left behind is physically commemorated by her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, a piece of real estate on the sidewalk that thousands of tourists stride over daily without always realizing the complicated woman behind the etched name. Her handprints and footprints at Grauman's Chinese Theater similarly preserve a snapshot of the younger, more glamorous days of her life, when each photograph, each film release, and each public appearance felt like a pivotal event. The star who soared under Howard Hughes's wings, who sparred wits with Bob Hope, who befriended Marilyn Monroe, and who inspired countless servicemen's pin-up fantasies, was also a multifaceted human being. Devout, philanthropic, musical, deeply flawed, and ultimately unforgettable. It's intriguing to think that for many younger film enthusiasts, Jane Russell's name may not ring a loud bell. Classic Hollywood is now a subject of retrospective documentaries, film festivals, and the dedicated passion of cinephiles who scour streaming platforms for old musicals or black and white westerns. But for those who do take the time to explore her filmography or read up on her life story, a new perspective emerges. You see the context: a small-town girl transplanted into a big city dream factory at a time when censorship boards, studio heads, and gossip columnists held extraordinary power over personal destiny. You also see a woman who refused to let that system define her entirely. Even if her acting talents weren't fully showcased, she continued to explore music, she built a humanitarian legacy around adoption, and she shared her Christian faith with anyone who would listen, even a major star like Marilyn Monroe, whose own life ended in tragedy. That layering of complexity is what elevates Jane Russell from a mere icon to a deeper figure of study. And perhaps that is the key takeaway. Beneath all the illusions, the marketing ploys, the multi-year studio contracts, was a person with passions, dreams, struggles, and moral convictions. Hollywood tends to reduce people to two-dimensional stars or has-beens, but Jane Russell's life, as we've seen, is a testament to the complexity that so often remains invisible on the big screen. It reminds us how each star we revere or rediscover had something beyond the roles they played, something more human, more vulnerable. But let's not pretend that her life was all high-minded devotion and artistry. Jane Russell was a multifaceted individual who could be brash, self-assured, and occasionally impetuous. She took a no-nonsense approach to certain issues, once describing her reason for leaving movies as simply getting too old, which, if we peel back the layers of humor, shows the painful reality of aging in an industry obsessed with youth. She also could be playful, as evidenced in her warm relationship with Marilyn Monroe. One can picture them giggling in their trailers between takes, indulging in jokes that likely made the intensity of filming more bearable. Hollywood sets can be notoriously stressful places, but forming genuine friendships can transform those experiences into treasured memories. Just as memorable is the image of Jane standing by her philanthropic cause, the World Adoption International Agency. In 1955, America was still grappling with traditional family structures and the notion that adoptions typically occurred domestically. Jane's initiative challenged that perspective. She took a personal hardship, her inability to conceive biological children, and turned it into a life's mission to help children who had no stable home. Spreading across borders, she facilitated adoptions for Americans looking to adopt from abroad, many from countries where living conditions for children were dire. It's little wonder that thousands of families found hope and joy thanks to her efforts. And yet, how many modern fans of classic cinema are aware that this glamorous star was also an innovator in the sphere of international adoption? That is the side of her story that truly deserves a spotlight, reminding us that stardom and service can coexist, even thrive together. It's also worth noting the cultural constraints of the 1940s and 1950s, when female stars were often typecast as either the wholesome girl next door or the sultry femme fatale. Jane Russell certainly fell into the second category, even if her personal life did not mirror the freewheeling bombshell image that her marketing campaigns promulgated. She was a devout Christian, which might seem incongruent with her roles, publicity photos, and the public persona of a pinup model. But that duality captures the essence of Hollywood, a place of contradictions, illusions, and transformations. She could attend church, perform in gospel quartets, and simultaneously be lauded as one of the industry's sex symbols. The tightrope walk between personal beliefs and industry demands was a balancing act that many stars never fully mastered, leading to emotional stress, mental breakdowns, and personal tragedies. Jane's reliance on alcohol, which dogged her for decades, might well have been tied to the pressures of sustaining that public image while yearning for a deeper sense of identity and security. Yet she made it all the way to 89, a long life by any measure, and especially so for someone immersed in an industry known for discarding its older stars. Her quiet final years and her inevitable passing from respiratory illness in her California home capture something poignant. After so many ups and downs, controversies, successes, and heartbreaks, she left the world in a far more unremarkable manner than the tabloids of her heyday might have concocted. Indeed, had she passed away in the 1950s or 1960s, the event likely would have triggered front-page headlines around the world. But times had changed, and Hollywood had marched on. Younger generations found new icons, new stories, new controversies. Yet for those who remembered Jane Russell, her final exit was met with a mixture of nostalgia and admiration, a bittersweet end to a life that once glowed under the Klieg lights of classic cinema. Now you might be wondering how we, in today's world of streaming services, viral TikTok dances, and social media influencers, can still find relevance in Jane's life. The answer lies in the universal themes that transcend generational gaps. The desire to be seen and understood, the tug of war between public image and personal truth, the capacity to nurture philanthropic dreams, and the struggle against internal demons like addiction. Jane's story embodies all these and more. She was a woman who lived on her own terms as best she could while navigating the labyrinth that was mid-century Hollywood. Her experiences could serve as a modern parable for aspiring creatives. In the midst of your own ambition, don't lose sight of who you are. For the devoted film buffs who track down Gentlemen Prefer Blondes or The Outlaw, the allure might initially be purely cinematic, an appreciation for the comedic timing or the historical significance of a film that dared to push censorship boundaries. But delve deeper, and you may see glimmers of Jane's real persona shining through those carefully staged camera angles. Perhaps it's the softness in her eyes during a quiet moment on screen, or a spark of genuine delight when she trades witty banter with Bob Hope. Somewhere beneath the studio marketing hype and the director's instructions resides a real woman grappling with her place in a world that prized youth and beauty above all else. In a way, her story is a microcosm of the entire Hollywood star-making system, which gave and took in equal measure. Jane's star status brought her fame, financial security, and the chance to dabble in music, meet fascinating people, and explore philanthropic projects. Yet the system also pigeonholed her, leaving her talents underutilized and her self-esteem battered by an ageist culture. It scrutinized her every move, from her fashion choices to her personal struggles, shaping her image as something for public consumption rather than a private journey. It's a delicate balance that few managed better than Jane Russell, who seemed to accept the inherent contradictions with a measure of grace. Her influence, both within and beyond the entertainment industry, lingers today. The path she paved in international adoption set a precedent for celebrities who would later also champion children's causes. Her foray into gospel music showed that devout faith and mainstream entertainment could intersect in meaningful ways. Her film roles, though not always lauded by critics, provided a stepping stone for future leading ladies who sought to break free from narrow typecasting. She was part of a wave of women in Hollywood who, whether they knew it or not, were rewriting the rules of stardom, creating new templates for success and identity. As we reach the end of this reimagined entertainment spotlight, let's look back at the life that began so humbly in Minnesota and ended in a California home almost 90 years later. Jane Russell was a pinup, a singer, an actress, a philanthropist, a Christian, and an adoptive mother. She was shaped by Hollywood, but she also shaped Hollywood in her own subtle ways. Her story remains relevant because it merges the timeless allure of the big screen with the personal complexities that make any life worth exploring. From the controversies surrounding The Outlaw to her philanthropic triumphs, from her comedic hits with Bob Hope to her sincere attempts to rescue children across borders, Jane left an indelible mark. Even in her final years, marred at times by the specter of alcoholism, she never entirely lost the fierce independence that propelled her from small-town dreamer to big-screen icon. So the next time you find yourself scrolling through a list of classic Hollywood films or catching a snippet of a jazzy mid-century tune, remember Jane Russell. Remember her not just for the glamour shots and provocative marketing that once made censors squirm, but for the depth and dimension she brought to her personal journey. Think of her as someone who didn't simply yearn for fame but sought creative and philanthropic outlets that went beyond the limelight. Imagine her gently ribbing Marilyn Monroe off set, or passionately organizing adoption paperwork, or hitting the high notes in a gospel recording studio. That's the real Jane Russell, a tapestry of contradictions, talents, and beliefs that remind us every star has a human story beneath the glitz. And with that, we draw the curtain on this tale of a classic Hollywood legend. Whether you're a lifelong devotee of vintage cinema, or you've just stumbled upon Jane Russell's name for the first time, we invite you to keep the conversation going. After all, the best stories never truly end. They echo in the hearts of those who hear them. So, if you've enjoyed this deep dive into an icon's life, stick around for future videos and spotlights. There's a world of hidden gems and untold tales waiting for you. Perhaps the next story will take you into the behind-the-scenes madness of another Golden Age classic. Or maybe it'll shine a spotlight on a modern celebrity grappling with some of the same issues Jane faced decades ago. In any case, stay curious, keep exploring, and never be afraid to look beyond the surface. The next time you press play on an old Jane Russell movie, let your imagination roam to the complexities of the woman behind the screen, and remember that every star, no matter how bright, has facets unseen by the glittering public eye.